Right, okay. Thank you very much for inviting us to talk on this. Do you want to drop onto the next slide, Rebecca? Right, what I've done, I've looked to see what grants have been coming out of DEFRA, and on this screen at the moment, these are the various ones that have run. The Countryside Productivity Scheme, which was for large grants, which was broken into improving forestry productivity, water resource management, adding value to agri-food, and improving farm productivity. That scheme's been and gone for the moment. No word on when it will come back again. Countryside Stewardship, which is what we've been heavily involved with from February through until the end of August. That is due to come back again early in February. We understand from the RPA, even though the details aren't finalised, that the scheme will be back again early, but there will be changes in the offer and the makeup of the offer. So we're yet to see that finalised yet. Other items that are flagged up are the coastal path work, farmer money reduction grant, which ran about 4 years ago, I think it was, and then the RDP growth programme and the RDP leader delivery, and also the water environment grant. All these can be identified if you do a search for Farm Grants UK, and you'll come up, one of the results will be the DEFRA website, and you can go onto that and you can actually register your email address and you'll get updates. And that's how I actually see to that. In terms of the Countryside Productivity Grant, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, that's just closed, and we understand it will be back again. One development on that going forward, we understand, is they're going to allow contractors to bid into that scheme as well. So that's offerings of grants between £3,000 and £12,000 a grant, and that's seen as being 40% funding based on standard costs. And it's a light touch approach to being able to get some of the funding. You can download the manual for the scheme that's just run. Just remember that the manual does change from scheme to scheme, so you need to get the most up-to-date one when you're looking at it. But worthwhile just looking to see what there has been on this round if you haven't already participated in the scheme, and see what might be of interest to you on your farm. Tends to be a bit more problematic for small farms to get into, because the minimum grant of £3,000, if you think that's 40%, you're going to be spending over £7,000 to get that bit of equipment that they're talking of. But it is there, it is worthwhile going for, and I have heard of a lot of people involved with it. We don't directly ourselves get involved with it, but I can see the merit in it, so I do promote it and raise awareness on it. Okay, so that's just how to get to the scheme, or the various schemes, and you can, as I say, you can register on the top right-hand side of the screen with your email address, and you get updates as and when things change. So if we go on to the next slide, Rebecca. And this is just part of Countryside Stewardship. I've just flagged up the opportunities within the woodland and forestry side of things. So the creation grant, woodland management plan, and the third part, which is the woodland tree health grant scheme. So if we can just go on to the next slide, Rebecca. Two schemes that have been running and keep on coming back again are the Countryside Hedgerows and Boundaries and the Countryside Historic Buildings and Restoration Grant. I think that restoration grant scheme has possibly closed now. It has run for a little while, and I think the window's closed. The Hedgerows and Boundaries scheme keeps on popping its head up on an annual basis, and I know that we're going to have some changes this spring with this scheme on the hedgerows and boundaries, but we'll see what those changes are going forward. As I say, the RPA haven't finalised what and how they want to deliver the hedgerows and boundaries and other grants. But as I say, there's some changes on the horizon for that. Worthwhile taking, if you don't want to go into a full-blown countryside stewardship scheme, it is worthwhile looking at the hedgerows and boundaries. So, getting those hedgerows in good condition, getting those stone walls brought back up to scratch again, if they've got, dilapidated to a certain level, is worthwhile looking at that. Otherwise, you've got the same options and more within countryside stewardship. So again, worthwhile looking at if you've got those, if those opportunities arise on your farm. If we can go on to the next slide, Rebecca. Now, the two manuals that I've highlighted for the front pages here are Countryside Stewardship Mid-Tier and Higher Tier. The Higher Tier manual, the emphasis on that is for tripler size, protected sites and high environmental value locations. So it doesn't apply to every farm. The alternative to the higher tier scheme is the mid-tier with the combination of wildlife offers, should you wish. And again, the caveat on looking at countryside stewardship in its various formats is to see which works best for you. And in the next few slides, I'll highlight some of the opportunities that I see going forward within the scheme. And again, the caveat on it is make sure you do get the most up-to-date manual. So the manuals that's shown here are for schemes beginning at the turn of this year coming. And there's always an update manual after various queries have been levied. So you always need to keep an eye on that. If you offer a scheme, go back into onto the DEFRA network and download the most up-to-date one, so you've got that as your final document. Could we go on to the next slide, Rebecca? Right, on this is a what I call a crib list that I've drawn together for countryside stewardship opportunities. They're the ones that I see as being most regularly used, but also trying to look at the crystal ball and think, what's natural England actually after with the scheme? What does DEFRA want? So looking at that, I've come up with a list, looking at the grassland, looking at grassland uplands, looking at the boundaries, and looking at the arable. And the last thing is looking at the historic features. So there's a list of items in there just with the codes to them, the brief title description, and the value, depending on whether it's in hectares, meters, or whatever the measurement, the payment rate may be. So typically on a grassland farm, the entry options could be GS1, which is taking corners out of management, GS2, low input to grassland, and then you start looking at other supplements, possibly like the GS17, which is lenient grazing supplement. So you can stack certain items on top of other ones. You can't do a total mix and match to suit your farm totally. It's what the scheme actually allows. And when you look into it, you can actually go onto the .gov website and look up the grants on a drop-down menu, put in either just a basic text description of what you're after, or the code if you happen to know what that is, and you can see the fine detail on the scheme about what's required, what's the environmental outputs they expect to see, and how you should manage it and implement it, and any key dates and so on are all in there on that, and that is seen as being the definitive source. Right. Question there from John is GS1 has been a one-off payment. No, that and again, put a bit of clarification. Yeah, this is why you need to read the manual and you need to read the descriptions on the DEFRA website. GS1 is a maximum area of 0.5 hectare, but the payment rate is based on a hectarage. So that £365 per hectare per year you won't get that because the maximum area you're going to have is 0.5 of a hectare. So it's half of that's £332.50, isn't it? But it's typically just taking those, a nasty little corner out of a permanent grassland field. Something that's a problematic area to your farm. You can fence it off, get the grant for the fencing work, take the corner out, leave it for a minimum of 4 years in the 5-year agreement. So that's how it's working. You can build that up. And also, like the GS1 happens, that you can fit that into a field which has GS2 on. You can't do it with every option, but you can do that type of thing. And that's why the likes of coming to us, if we're looking at countryside stewardship, we can hopefully point you in the direction, but ultimately the decision is for yourself. Same is exactly the same on the arable side. There tends to be a lot more options that fit quite nicely on the arable side, depending on what type of farm you are. But it is worthwhile looking at it. And you also do have to look at, if you do have a SSI, scheduled monument, or other features on your farm, you may be obliged to put those parcels into the agreement. There's a push that you are looking after those. So you've got to be careful with that. And again, talking to protected sites team about SSIs. If you've got scheduled monuments, talking historic England, so that you actually get the right solution for your farm. Okay, if we could go on to the next slide, please. I used this on the last presentation that we ran. And again, looking at that mix and match of options for countryside stewardship, which is a 5-year agreement for mid-tier, and most of the higher tier options are 5 years. Some vary a little bit depending on whether you're looking at land or woodland type situations. Some of the options are up to 20 years depending on the individual item. And look, on this page, what I'm looking at protecting water. So some of these options work quite nicely. So like I said, SW2 intensive grassland buffer strips, there are caveats on that, but there's an option there which will help somebody on a grassland one. You can look on the arable side, looking at flower mixes, cultivated areas, far up the plants. All these can actually help mitigate against runoff into ditches, into watercourses. And at the bottom of the page, I put the link that you would go to get these solutions. The easy way is just to type into a search engine, Farm Grants UK, and one of the options you'll see is what's actually at the bottom of this page. It's a DEFRA website. Go to that and you can put in the permutations of what you want. And you can actually tailor some of the responses depending on your farm type. Are you arable? Are you upland? Are you grassland? And you can tailor it so it only brings up the results that that are a tighter fit to what you've got. Could we go on to the next slide, Rebecca? Right, and again, on the other side of it, I've talked about countryside stewardship, which is a 5-year agreement. The grants, again, I've got what I like to call as a crib list of options that I see available. And there's one or two caveats on these. The red ones, the red text ones are showing where we see most uptake of the grant scheme. And you'll see some asterisks on some of them. They actually need CSF support and advice. And one key thing where CSF support and advice is required, it also means you have to be in the high priority target area for those as well. So when we're talking of the Alt Crossens, the Crossens is classed as a medium priority area, so can't go for all these options, but the Crossens could, as long as they meet the criteria on that. Sorry, I'm just reading. We'll come back to that one because I couldn't read it properly. Okay, but there's a list there. I'm quite happy to share that as a PDF document. because between the countryside stewardship mid-tier application items and this list of capital items, that can help your journey in making an application that much easier. If we could go on to the next slide, please, Rebecca. What I've done, we've talked about actually delivery, looking at grants through the scheme. We also offer advice out. So again, I've listed all the different options that we offer through Catchment Sensitive Farming. The red ones I see as being the most popular ones that I actually deliver out on. So what we do is, if we had the time and got the skills, we would go out to a farm and do one of these reports. But the reality is, we need to be out on more than just a few farms in a year. We need to get out and about and spread the word and help influence change to reduce pollution risk to water, to air, and hopefully help reduce flood risk as well. So we actually use contractors that are qualified in those work areas to do that. So this doesn't cost the farmer anything. The project pays for it. So that's DEFRA's picking up the bill on all of this. At the moment, it's still European money. It will become UK money as soon as we're fully cleared of the transition out of Europe. So we have all these various different types of reports. And if we just go on to the next slide, because it continues on. And the last 5 or so options on the top there, there's 6 options actually. It's cropped on my machine, on my computer a bit. Again, those are still ones. Some of them are fairly new ones because of the air quality side of it, that we picked up the remit on that to reduce ammonia. And the last section is about soil sampling, and these are the different standards that we look at this moment in time. Some of it is to go and finer detail depending on the farm type that you're on. If we can go on to the next slide, please. And again, if you were in on the last webinar, you'll recognise some of these pictures. This is the same as last time, but it covers the areas that we're trying to address. We're looking at the source of the issues, the pathway, where's that water and contaminants getting to, looking towards the solutions. So if we go on to the next page, on to the next slide, please. So again, here's some of the solutions. These are all grassland orientated machines, because these are the photographs I had, but helping reduce runoff, but also improving farm efficiency. Because if you, sorry, that's my dog contributing. So if you can aerate the soil, you're going to lift it, make it drain better. And your plants in the ground can actually utilise and get down to the nutrients and to the water reserves that they need to, so you can have a better productivity. And the same applies on the arable side as well. There's no difference. You just got to be careful in the type of kit you use on grassland, especially if you've got land like we have it, where we have stone drains. You don't want to go in with the sward lifter and destroy all the stone drains that you have. If we can go on to the next slide, and again, I apologise for the dog. She's quite possessive, and she's obviously heard somebody arrive on the farm. Again, we're looking at the opportunities in terms of grants, and this just helps you sort of realise some of the opportunities. So that's just flagging up some of the keyhole items that we're looking at. So if we go on to the next slide. And I've looked in better detail on this. So, the top right-hand corner one is opportunity to do concreting work, and also looking at, so that's the code for that is RP15. The next one on the right-hand side is livestock area for roofing, which is code is RP28. RP28 has 5 options in it, depending on what you're looking at, and we'll come on to another one later on. Sediments, ponds and traps is an option. Sometimes it's actually easier to do it yourself as opposed to go through the scheme. because there's a threshold. If you're above a certain threshold in square meters, you need a report done, and that takes some time to be commissioned. And you can maybe sometimes just do it more easily on your own without involving the grant. And then the last option on that slide is looking at fencing off watercourses. Obviously, this is FG2 is sheep netting, but you could be looking at fencing off other types of features such as woodlands or hedges. Okay, if we can go on to Rebecca, onto the next slide, please. So again, looking at some of the options we have, the grant options tend to lend themselves better to the livestock sector, whereas countryside stewardship mid-tier seems to lend itself better to the agricultural sector, to the arable side of things. But again, if you're storing slurry or manure, RP28 again is one of those options you could look at. This one happens to be a wheaten wall one, so it starts off with slurry and we end up with solid muck at the end of the day, but then they've got to handle the liquid portion in the right manner. The other option there is looking at livestock and machinery tracks. You can either use geotextile, dig out that, put geotextile in, stone it up and then put a finishing layer on the top, or you can actually use upturned railway sleepers. But our project and a few other projects have meant that railway sleepers are at a bit of a premium nowadays. If you can get them, they're good, but you are limited on the width, whereas the track, the specification is 2.4 meters wide. Anything wider than that is at your expense, but as long as it meets the criteria, that's all right. Bottom left is putting a cross drain in on a track. You can actually use the cross drains option in the farmyard as well, because you can break up the run of water down a yard. I like this example. It's just a recess in a concrete section across the road, run diagonally, and you can lift this grade out in this instance, run a shovel down and get any grit and stone out of it. And the bottom right-hand side is a pipe culvert. At the moment, the one disadvantage with this is its specification is for concrete pipes. We used to have the ability to use plastic twin wall type piping, which is far easier to handle. Hopefully we might get that specification back into the scheme, but it's really meant for a mini bridge between fields, so that your livestock and your machinery aren't tracking up through that watercourse and causing pollution in the sense of that. Okay, so if we can go on to the next slide. And obviously I'm going to cross over a little bit. Environmental land management, so tests and trials ongoing, projected rollout between 2024 and 28. Public money for public goods is one of the topical titles that they use in it. You just need to remember part of what's happening is the basic payment is being tapered down from 2021, so this coming year, through to 2028, and depends on the taper, on what your farm size. But also the other thing that obviously DEFRA is concerned about is a potential drop-off of uptake of countryside stewardship. So in this year's manual for the scheme, and I'll pull the extract out from the page, they've actually stated that if you're successful in going into mid-tier, then Elms comes along and you see it better, as a better option. At the end of one of the financial years, you'll be able to, or calendar years, it'll be calendar years, you could actually potentially move over without penalty. So they're encouraging you to keep on going with the scheme as we've got now, with the view that if you saw it was a better option in the long term, you could move over into Elms. Okay. The next slide, Rebecca. And that's it from me.